It's been more than a generation since any federal government made any significant new investments in social housing. And according to the government's own figures, 1.7 million Canadians are currently in need of core housing. The long-awaited National Housing Strategy earmarks $40 billion over 10 years to tackle some immense challenges, such as removing 500,000 households from housing need and cutting chronic homelessness in half. Can it deliver? Joining us now for their assessments in Burnaby, British Columbia, Paul Kershaw, Associate Professor in the School of Population and Public Health at UBC and the founder of Generation Squeeze, a nonprofit advocating for generational equality. In our nation's capital, Jacqueline Kennelly, Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Carleton University. And here in studio, Quam McKenzie, CEO of the Wellesley Institute and Director of Health Equity at CAMH, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. Michelle German, Senior Manager, Policy and Partnerships at Evergreen, a national nonprofit city-building organization. And Greg Sutter, author of Still Renovating, a history of Canadian social housing policy, and a senior researcher also at the Wellesley Institute. And we're delighted to welcome you three to our studios. You two again, you, Greg, for the first time. Nice to have you here. And to our guests in Points Beyond, it's great to have you on as well. Let me just unveil this fact file here and bring everybody up to scratch on some of the highlights of this just announced National Housing Strategy, because it will involve investing $40 billion over 10 years, as we suggested, nearly $16 billion to create 10,000 new affordable housing units, $4 billion for what's called a new Canada Housing Benefit, $2.2 billion to reduce homelessness, providing funds to repair nearly 250,000 existing affordable housing units, $300 million in additional funding for housing needs in Canada's north, and, most interestingly, declaring housing a fundamental right. All right, let's get some feedback on this. Michelle, start us off here. Initial reaction.
Well, Steve, a lot of people are saying that this is a historic moment, and I believe that indeed it is. The federal government has taken a very big step, and I think they've introduced three game changers. One is they've added an gender equity lens to all public policy, so considering everything from the lens of gender. They've introduced a portable housing benefit right across the country.
So you get it wherever you live.
You can get it wherever you live, dealing with the core housing need, as you pointed out at the top of the show, and the introduction of housing as a fundamental right, I think is a really important step.
More on all of those as we go along. Jacqueline, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Michelle. This is definitely a positive set of announcements. I think what's also true is there aren't a lot of details yet. The details on the homelessness strategy, for instance, has not yet been released on the Indigenous housing strategy. So I am excited about the directions it's going, but I'm also in a little bit of wait and see mode. I want to see what's going to happen, particularly around homelessness, and also see where the government intends to go with the Indigenous housing strategy.
Quam McKenzie.
Well, I and Wellesley, we're interested in health. And a housing crisis is a health crisis. And we are in the middle of a housing crisis at the moment. And it's a severe crisis. So I feel that the government is going in the right direction, but it is much, much, much too little. And it's going to take too long. And I think that in the meantime, people will die. And that's my worry about this. I think they're going in the right direction, but there's so much to do. There's a great need, and I think this is not enough, and it's too slow.
You would like to see more urgency?
Yeah, much more urgency.
Paul Kershaw, your take.
I actually agree with that last sentiment, and I would say that the National Housing Strategy in its current form is doing a decent amount to reinvest the federal government's leadership into addressing social housing and trying to tackle some of the shameless amounts of homelessness we have in this country. But the plan fails because it fails to recognize that even if we were to double the amount of social housing we have in this country, still 9 in 10 Canadians would rely on the market to provide them access to suitable homes at a price point that's in reach for what they earn. And there's very little talk in the National Housing Strategy about how outdated, old-fashioned policies are interfering with supply and inviting harmful kinds of demand that are driving prices of homes for renters and prospective owners out of reach for what they're earning.
Greg, your initial analysis.
The strategy is a major step forward, but it falls short of being transformative. It reinforces, it puts the federal government in a lead in a strategic way. It reinforces a cost-shared system of the federal and provincial and other governments. It provides some certainty for several years, hopefully for 10 years, and it makes, as was mentioned, one big policy move with the new Canada Housing Benefit.
Let's follow up with you, Greg, because we pointed out off the top that the federal government has kind of been out of the social housing building business for a long time. How much housing did the federal government provide to meet the needs of Canadians when it was previously active on this file?
There's two parts to the answer. The first is that there is a system of about 500,000 social housing units that exists and was built, mostly sort of 20 to 50 years ago. And that does receive some federal money to help keep it affordable. In terms of production, though, if we look at the 1970s and 80s, about just under 20,000 units a year of social housing was being built, so nonprofit, cooperative, and public housing. And under the new strategy, we're looking at 6 to 10,000, somewhere in that range each year.
Quam, we just saw a graph which had a couple of lines on it, one showing much more significant building long time ago, much less in more recent years. There it is again. Public, nonprofit, co-op housing is the blue line, and that line is much bigger than the post-1996 new affordable rental units. And as you look at the last, almost 20 years right now, with the exception of a couple of blips, not much at all. Tell us what the actual impact on the ground is of what that graph says.
So we look at those graphs and we see that there's not a lot of new affordable housing. And when people are thinking about health and they're thinking about housing, they're usually thinking about homelessness, and they say, right, okay, we know that people who are homeless don't live as long. What people don't realize is that poor housing also has an impact on health. And so when we start thinking about it, we start thinking, oh yeah, of course, mold, infestation, infections, or just poor repair, and then we're into accidents. But one of the other problems that happens because of that, because of the cost of housing, is that people have less money. So if you're spending maybe 70% of your income on housing, then you've got financial pressures and stress and finances, and anxiety in general decreases your life expectancy. But also, if you're spending 70% of your money on housing, then you may not be able to spend it on food. And at this time of year, we're seeing more and more people going to food banks because they can't afford food, and they can't afford medicines, and they can't afford to pay to do some exercise. They just can't afford the basics of life.
So there is a very straight line between bad housing and bad health.
Bad housing leads to bad health.
Paul, help us out understanding here, because you were the one who referenced the fact that the private sector essentially does 90% of the housing in this country. Why has the private market not filled whatever void there is as it relates to housing difficulties in the country?
Well, two factors are really at play right now. Our population has dramatically changed in Canada by comparison with a generation ago when my mom was a young woman. Like back then we had 22 million Canadians and we were less likely to live in urban centers. If you flash forward to today, we have now 36 million Canadians and we're more likely to live in urban centers. And so there's just been some fundamental changes in our supply and demand. And the question is, did our public policy adapt in order to help the market continue to be efficient? And the answer to that question is largely no. Think about the city of Toronto, where you're meeting today. Most of the land in Toronto is zoned for either single homes or other very low density. At a moment when the market is pricing the land at very, very high levels and just begging additional building to be put on top so that the units could come in at a price point that would be more in reach for what people earn these days. And simultaneously, because there's been such great growth in the housing market by comparison with the economy more generally, we're incentivizing people.
Is it my imagination, or did we just lose British Columbia? I don't think it was my imagination. All right, we'll get Paul back on and then we'll pick up with this. Michelle, lots of different terms flying around out there, and I think we need some better understanding of what they are. Affordable housing, public housing, rental housing, subsidized housing. Is it all essentially the same stuff?
No, Steve, and it's a lot to understand, and I think that it's important when we're on shows like this and we're talking to a broader audience that we're able to break down the pieces a little bit more. So when the government talks about affordable housing, they're talking about people who are paying 30% or less of their income on their housing.
Is anybody doing that anymore?
Not a lot.
Not
of
in Toronto,
people.
I can't imagine.
No,
but anyway.
and it hasn't changed much over the last 10 years. The census data that was posted last week showed that the amount of people paying 30% or less or more of their income on housing in Toronto hasn't changed in 10 years. So we're seeing that there aren't many adjustments, even though the population is growing, and we're seeing it harder and harder to find the right housing.
So that's affordable housing?
Yes.
Public
So
housing, rental, subsidized, what's all
deep
that?
core housing, which is people paying 50% or more of their income on housing, and we're seeing that as a very much huge problem in Ontario. So again, the census data that came out last week showed that 8 municipalities out of 10 who have the highest need of deep core housing are in Ontario. And now it's our job to figure out what's a supply issue. So when is it a time when people can't find, rental housing who are in middle income, and when is it an affordability issue, meaning it's hard for people to maintain the housing that they have by meeting what Kwam was talking about around paying for food and paying for housing at the same time.
Jacqueline, since you were the one who referenced the paucity of details around this so far, let me put this next question to you. If 8 of the 10 most chronic areas that were just referenced here by Michelle are in the province of Ontario, is that necessarily to suggest that Ontario is going to get the lion's share of this $40 billion over 10 years that's been allocated?
I think that's a good question, Steve. I think it does raise the question. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think it does raise the question of the relationship between the federal government and the provinces and territories in terms of rolling out this plan. I think what we see at the provincial level and even at municipal levels has actually been a lot of local communities and provinces moving quite far ahead in terms of developing plans to address homelessness in particular and housing affordability. And so I think that the federal government is stepping up to the table, and the way in which they distribute those funds and respond to the provincial needs and the municipal needs will be really key in terms of determining the success of this plan.
Let me do a follow-up with you, though, Jacqueline, because I think you also mentioned that we're not going to see any of this transpire for another 2 years. Some cynics have pointed out that it's probably after the next federal election that all of this is supposed to kick in. I'm going to come to you in a second, Kwam, because I know you're exercised about that fact as well. But why does it take 2 years to negotiate all these federal, provincial, territorial agreements? That feels like a long time.
Yeah, it does feel like a long time. And I think one of the dangers of it taking so long, there's many dangers in it taking so long. Obviously, not addressing the issues urgently isn't enough, as Kwam mentioned. But also, I think there's a danger in it taking a long time in that people feeling as if, in fact, this is a failure and perhaps turning away from the policy. So it is definitely a concern that the plan is stretched out over 10 years, that it seems as if it requires the re-election of the federal Liberals in order to be implemented, and that's definitely a big concern. And also there's a concern that if it takes too long to roll out, and if in fact it's too little too late, that we won't see any results, and people will feel like that, well, this is just a problem that can't be addressed and give up. I think one of your guests mentioned earlier, this is an issue that's been in development for a decade, a generation. You mentioned in your introduction, and it's going to take a long time to fix as well. And so we really need it to be. People need to understand that it's going to take a long time. So there's definitely a concern that if it doesn't start rolling out faster, that it will take even longer to address, and people will lose interest and lose hope.
Okay, Kwam, take your best shot.
So one of the issues I had, and I'm feeling really bad now because everybody's being really positive and I keep on saying, is that the 40 billion is not necessarily, is 40 billion, I think, including the amount of money that's coming from provinces and municipalities.
Yes.
And including the amount that's going to be available for loans. So the actual new money is not as much as one thinks. The new money, I think, is about 11 billion over, maybe, it depends how you measure it, between 11 and 15 billion over 11 years. which gets you, it depends how it's passed out, but maybe a third of it comes to Ontario, but only if Ontario cost shares at a third of that new money.
And we shouldn't assume, I guess, there's a federal Liberal majority government in Ottawa, there is a provincial Liberal majority government at Queen's Park, and yet they've still got to hammer out an agreement.
And they've got to hammer out an agreement, but that agreement is likely to span an election. So we don't know exactly where it's going, and we don't know that people necessarily will cost share in the way that people want to. So we don't know exactly where this is going to land. We know we're making progress, I think, but we don't know where we're going, really.
Does this trouble you, Greg?
I'd like to add on that, yes. So I think that we should recognize that this government has increased funding to higher levels this year and last year. If you look at the average dollars a year over the 10 years of this strategy, the federal funding will be about $3 billion a year, plus $1 billion in loans. The $3 billion is about the same as this year and last year. It's higher than the $2 billion we've sort of had as a floor in the past 15 years. $3 billion is similar to what we had in the stimulus period of 2011.
The way you are describing this does not make it sound that dramatic.
Well, I want to say that the federal money will draw provincial money. It's higher than we've had. It's not transformationally higher. It provides some certainty about the money. I, too, am a little concerned about the next 2 years when we'll see a dip. It's not as if nothing is going to be happening. The federal government and the provinces and territories have been negotiating already about the terms of this new arrangement. I think we'll see fairly rapidly, we'll see agreements around the continued federal funding for existing social housing. I think there'll be possibly some hiccups in getting the new affordable rolling out and under development. And they've said it'll take a couple of years to negotiate the new Canada Housing Benefit because it's a new move and it has a lot of intersections with existing provincial housing benefits in 4 provinces and with other income security.
Paul, can I get your take on the fact that none of this is scheduled to kick in for a couple of years yet?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to weigh in on that. And I really want to echo some of the sentiments that my colleagues from the Wellesley Institute have just made. That let's give the Trudeau government credit for bringing Ottawa back to the table to provide some leadership on housing. But the new dollars are not that transformative at all. And as Kwan was making the point earlier, it's really about the equivalent of about $1 billion of new money a year. Now, is that a lot of money for an individual? You bet it is. But at our country level, if you just look at some of the bigger things that are happening in the 2017 federal budget, in one single year, before most of the new money for the housing strategy will kick in, we will increase old age security by the tune of $12 billion. Now that's because we really do think something like the guaranteed income supplement is an entitlement. And I think that's a helpful and healthy benchmark to look at for when Canadians are investing substantial new dollars by comparison with what we've done with the national housing strategy. And I think it's part of the reason why it is difficult for the federal government to find substantial new dollars heading into do something like this Canada Housing Benefit, the portable housing benefit that Michelle was championing earlier, which is an important adaptation. But it's difficult for the federal government to find new dollars when they don't actually think more broadly about what is happening in their budget as the population is aging and how we're going to collect adequate revenue to accommodate that and anticipate that and adapt for that while still leaving funds left over to invest in other important things like a housing strategy.
Well, Michelle, I mean, this is not a cynical program. We don't take a cynical view of the world here. But the fact is, older people vote in much bigger numbers than poorer people vote. Might that help explain why the commitment to the program Paul just mentioned is somewhat more significant than the one to affordable housing?
Well, I'd actually like to put a little bit of context in this because I feel like the conversation has been very focused on a billion here, a billion there. So Ontario has had a portable housing benefit piloted over the last 2 years. And they've taken $60 billion and served about 1,000 women fleeing domestic violence each year. The amount of money that we would anticipate from the new Canada Housing Benefit program would be approximately 4 times that amount. So I think what is transformative about this is that we have the opportunity to completely decrease deep core housing needs. So people paying 50% or more on their housing through the Canada Housing Benefit.
And let's just understand how that works.
Yeah.
That is a government to tenant or government to homeowner shelter allowance, in essence, right?
It wouldn't necessarily go towards homeowners. Those details are still being worked out.
But renters certainly?
But renters certainly, so it's directly to a person.
To help them pay the rent.
To help them pay their rent. And additionally, governments are really looking at other components of income security. So just last week, the Ontario government launched a new task force on income security and acknowledged that housing and providing a housing benefit in tandem with a child benefit every month, it's part of a puzzle that together makes sure that we have a much stronger safety net. So I agree the housing strategy doesn't go deep enough, but I do think that it's going to be serving our most vulnerable populations first and foremost, in addition to setting targets to reducing 50% of homelessness
right.
across the
Jacqueline,
country.
let me get your take on one thing here, which is that if we're going to spend $4 billion for a so-called new Canada housing benefit, is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about directly giving money from government to renters to help them pay the rent. That's $4 billion that will be spent, Jacqueline, without actually creating one new housing unit at all. Does anybody have a problem with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put it that way, obviously that is really important. You know, my area of research is homelessness, so I could focus a little bit on that in response to that question, Steve, because we can't actually tackle homelessness, and obviously we can't tackle housing affordability unless there are new units built and affordable housing built. The shift that's happening in the homelessness sector has been towards a policy called Housing First, and the federal government has embraced that. But Housing First requires that there be housing, and so it definitely helps. I think the portable housing benefit will be helpful because then it allows people to access market rents in ways that they might not have been able to previously. But the reality is there is not enough affordable housing stock. And so, you know, there is a commitment within the National Housing Strategy to build some housing, and that is good. And as your other guests have said, this is a much needed re-entry of the federal government into building housing.
No, but as you point out, it helps if you're in. But it helps if you're in. If you're not in, it doesn't help you at all.
That's right. Well, you know, I don't know if it doesn't help you at all, but I think that, you know, as I said in my opening comments, we don't really know yet what's going to happen with the homelessness strategy. I mean, the people within the sector have a sense, and there's definitely been a lot of consultations. They have good people at the table. They have people with lived experience of homelessness at the table as well, and that is key in order to make a well-informed plan. But you know, I think in order to address homelessness, there has to be housing.
Quinn.
So I'm no economist, but I do know that if you're going to use market strategies, you have to think them through. So at the moment in Toronto, we have 1% of rental properties that are void. So essentially we have no rental properties that are void. And we know that even at the bottom end, we've got a rental, the costs of renting have hit a level that sort of balance what people can't afford. Yeah, but they can just about manage on them in some way. If you then pump a housing benefit into the bottom with no rent controls and no topside protection, what happens is rents float up because you've got a supply and demand issue.
But we do have topside protection. There are rent controls on every building in the city now, or in the province.
There are some rent controls, but the rent controls, if you remember what can happen is that when the person leaves, you can change the rent,
right.
yeah? So over a period of time, your rents just go up.
I see.
That's what happens. So you have to protect that situation if you want it to work. And that's part of the worry about sort of, you know, this is the devil in the detail, or God in the detail, depends which way you go, in that, in theory, yes, it could work, but in practice, you've got to actually sort out the market in a way that stops it just being money that goes from the government to the tenant straight into the landlord's hands.
Right. Can I, Greg, get you to react to Sheldon? We're at middle of page 3 here. I want to read this graphic here from Kelly McParland, writing in the National Post. And Greg, I'll get you to comment on this first. Canada's provincial premiers must occasionally pine for the good old days of Stephen Harper, when the Prime Minister semi-politely ignored them, refusing to attend their group get-togethers or even occasionally to return their calls. When the Liberals came to power, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised a warmer relationship with mutual respect and displays of good fellowship. As with numerous other Liberal vows, it hasn't quite worked out as anticipated. On health care, climate change, marijuana legalization, and most recently, the Liberal National Housing Strategy, the premiers have discovered that Ottawa gets the glory and they get the costs. Is that accurate?
I think it's a mixed picture. So I think that the federal government it does want to cut the ribbons on the new affordable housing, and I think it's going to be possibly challenging shifting from a provincially or in Ontario municipally managed overseeing the new affordable housing projects developed by nonprofits. However, the federal government has also committed to keep its money flowing into existing nonprofits and public housing to keep rents affordable. That's a big move, and that will be much appreciated by provinces and nonprofit housing in communities across the country.
Okay, we've looked at the situation coast to coast to coast now. We've had some understanding of those who are putting sort of 30% towards their rents, 50% towards their rents, 70% in some cases towards their rent. I want to introduce, and Sheldon, again, I'm bottom of page 4 here. Greg, for those in dire need of housing, I'm talking about people who desperately need supportive housing, Indigenous communities, which are badly underhoused in the north, refugees, maybe some seniors. What's in this plan that ought to make them feel good?
Yes. So doing more affordable housing in general will benefit these groups. If you look at what nonprofits are going to come forward with proposals, or where are municipalities, if they're kicking in money, which the federal government wants in its co-investment fund, where are the municipal priorities going to be? Well, they're going to include, high needs groups. There's no question about that. As well, again, looking at the existing social housing and the safeguard of continuing that federal money for that existing housing houses a lot of people coming out of homelessness, a lot of seniors who are just getting by on old age security and the income supplement and so on. So yes, there is something in it for them. Now, is it enough? I think more would be good.
Well, we know nothing is ever enough. I mean, that's plain on the face of it. But Michelle, do you see enough here as a sort of a first stab at this to give you some confidence that those groups I just mentioned ought to feel a little better today about their prospects?
Well, I think it takes pressure off of them. So it's not enough, but we're also going to see cost savings in other areas. So the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness has done a really good job at highlighting the cost of homelessness, noting that it can cost up to $60,000 a year for somebody experiencing chronic homelessness as they work their way through a system. So thinking about somebody who ends up occupying hospital beds, somebody who ends up in shelter beds, somebody who might even get caught up in the police system.
And it's cheaper for all of us if these people are housed.
It's a lot cheaper for all of us, so it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do.
Because the economist Quayne McKenzie says so.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think that that's a really important part of this math equation that we're all breaking down. It's that over the long term, we're going to be saving a lot of money. And if we're able to address the most vulnerable across the country, we're going to be ensuring that people aren't going to be spiraling out where they're worrying about how am I going to eat, how am I going to feed my kids, how am I going to get to my medical appointment, because they'll have a little bit more security in where they're at.
Paul, I know that you're deeply interested, and a lot of your research is focused on the next generation coming up, younger people, how they're going to get into the housing market at all, either as owners or renters. Is there anything in this that you look at and think, yeah, that'll help them?
Well, I think Michelle captured the strength of the National Housing Strategy, which is a strategy that focuses on, as a first step, how do we address the situation of those who are most vulnerable? And the most vulnerable can be across age groups. But if you're thinking about, is this a strategy that actually responds to the challenges facing younger Canadians trying to make a home for ourselves as renters or owners, it has very little to offer. There's really no mention in the strategy that, like a generation ago, when my mom was starting out as a young woman, it took 5 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average-priced home. But if you flash forward to today, the country average from coast to coast now takes 13 years of work. And in Ontario, 15 years of work. Some cities considerably more. And as a result, we need a national housing strategy that on the one hand does address the blight that is homelessness in Canada and the challenges facing the working poor who are trying to afford rent. But we also need a national housing strategy that says, my gosh, home prices have left typical people's earnings behind. And that's especially bad for people not yet into the housing market as renters or owners, because the high home prices has also benefited those who've been in the housing market for decades. Some people over the last decades, while they've been sleeping and eating and so on, will be delighted that home prices have escalated so much because they've become wealthy. And a national housing strategy needs to engage with that generational dynamic where high home prices help some but really harm another group. People that those who benefited love, because we have Thanksgiving dinner with multiple generations. And a national housing strategy that's adequate would engage on all of those fronts, talking about winners and losers in the housing strategy and thinking about how best to adapt.
Okay, Quem first and then Jacqueline second. I want to get into some discussion with about 5 minutes and change to go here on what I think all of you pointed to when I went through that fact file at the beginning and thought, okay, that's interesting and that is necessary. The Prime Minister declaring housing as a fundamental human right. What does that mean in tangible terms?
I really don't know.
Do you think they know?
Well, one of the reasons I think they don't know is I was listening to the Prime Minister talk on Monday, and he was asked about whether housing was a human right, and he pivoted and said, no, it's a rights-based approach. And then he was asked whether housing, if it's a human right, whether they should change the charter. And he said, well, we can talk about that. Maybe we should talk about that in 10 years.
So it's not a human right like freedom of expression, freedom of religion, that kind of thing.
So it's not a human right. It's a rights-based, they're talking about a rights-based approach.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. And so what I know is that if people start using the words, start talking about it as a right and start saying, this is what we're recognizing, it starts a conversation that wasn't there before. I know that Bruce Porter has been trying to have that conversation for ages. He's a housing advocate. He's been pushed back on it. And now they've opened the door to have that conversation. And I'm interested in that conversation. And if they're talking about it as a right and part of the right to health, which they are signed up on, well, let's have that conversation. Let's start moving it forward. And let's start seeing what we can do now that they've opened the door to say, well, we're interested in having the conversation, because it wasn't there before.
See how many more comments I can get in our time left. Jacqueline, why don't you go next, and then let's hear from Greg on this.
Sure. So just picking up on what Kwam was saying, I think I also noticed that sort of oscillation between housing as a human right and a rights-based approach, and I think they are different. I think a rights-based approach to housing is recognizing that no one will be denied housing on the basis of the kinds of categories that are recognized in the Charter: gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, etc. But housing as a human right is different. It is recognizing that every one of us has the right to be housed. It doesn't matter whether we have enough money or whether we have a criminal record or whether we are using drugs, that in fact we are entitled to housing. That is a profound shift. What does it mean in pragmatic terms, in terms of policy? I'm not sure. But I think what I hope for is that declaring housing as a human right and trying to integrate that into a national housing strategy and everything that flows from that will also result in a cultural shift. I think it's a much needed cultural shift in Canada. If we look at the idea of, talking about young people and saying, you get to go to school if you're smart enough or if you are clean, but otherwise you don't. I mean, that's really how we treat housing right now, as something that is about the deserving rather than an entitlement, and that shift really needs to happen in Canada. And so, I hope that this will help facilitate that.
Greg, how profound a change do you think that is?
I think they're declaring a sort of spirit of approach. They're not entrenching a legal thing that you can launch a lawsuit on, right? However, I must say I'm more interested in what governments spend and arrange as programs that gets you housing. Having a right. How do you enforce the right? That's the question. You enforce the right with resources to nonprofits and so on to provide affordable housing. You don't so much or so effectively enforce it by putting words in a legal document.
Michelle, what did you take housing as a human right to mean?
I felt like it was a call to action. A couple of the different components in the National Housing Strategy that we haven't talked about yet are one, a public education campaign that they said that they would launch, as well as acknowledging the importance of collaborative infrastructure. So saying we can't do this alone, and really good public policy solutions come outside of government. So I see it as a call of action, and the biggest mistake we can make is to take our eye off the ball of pushing them as hard as we can. I think the only way we've gotten to this point is from 30 years of advocacy from housing stakeholders.
Gotcha. Paul, if you can do it in 30 seconds, that's what we've got left. What do you take it to mean?
Well, I'm going to build on Michelle's call to action, and I think that talking about housing in the language of rights means that we should commit to the principle of homes first and investment second. Let's all remember that the primary purpose of a real estate market has to be the efficient supply of suitable homes that are in reach for what typical people earn. If you can make an investment return on your real estate purchase, that's fabulous, but that now needs to be a secondary consideration to first keeping home prices in reach.
Great discussion, and Paul, you can count. Thank you so much for doing that. That's Paul Kershaw at University of British Columbia, Jacqueline Kennelly from Carleton University in Ottawa, Quam McKenzie from the Wellesley Institute in CAMH, Michelle German from Evergreen, and Greg Sutter from Wellesley Institute as well. Great discussion, everybody. Thanks for coming on TVO tonight and helping us out with this.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.